Divine Source, Great Spirit, I'm calling you this day, grateful to be called here, to join, to be in service, be channels for your light. We ask that you speak through us and deliver the messages that are most helpful, guide us in every moment to the offering, the healing, and the awakening that you would offer. And so it is.
Welcome to Talking Spirit. My name is Jutta and I'm back with my friend Elizabeth.
Greetings, everyone.
Yeah, welcome back to our little podcast here. We've been praying this morning and yesterday around what might want to be talked about, and the theme that was sort of coming up in awareness was one around roles or masks that one might take on during a lifetime, and also on the spiritual path. And yeah, we were just sort of talking about together before this recording just how many roles are taken on. Like, I was mentioning to Elizabeth, it could be anything from daughter, brother, mother, father, victim, perpetrator, boss, teacher, student. And we take on so many roles throughout this life. And, when we talk about the spiritual path, there's always, along with it, is this desire and calling to really drop all of these roles and drop all of the masks. And in order for us to do that, we have to see them first. And yeah, so we just felt to explore this a little bit and see what we might have to share around our own experiences with different roles or masks that we've taken on, or things we've seen on our spiritual journeys. And yeah, maybe it'll spark something for anyone who might be listening. So let's see what the spirit has to say. Anything that pops in for you right away, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think the first thing in this moment is sort of a reminder to be gentle. Gentle in terms of how I communicate in this moment, and also gentle in terms of the need to approach ourselves and our minds with gentleness. And for me, that comes entirely from the spirit. When I look on my mind through my journey, there's been a lot of hardness, a lot of harshness, a lot of tightness. And so when I had revealed to me some of these elements of my mind, it didn't feel gentle a lot of the time. And I also get used often to like poke the bear a little bit with others. And so I've seen reflected back when a mask is reflected back to somebody that it can be uncomfortable and painful. And we get used, Jutta and I, and I'm sure many that will listen, to play the role of mirror, facilitator, support. And like everything that we talk about, it's a real dance. And there's a massively steep learning curve how to do any of this. We were talking before about just doing these recordings. Thank God we have in our heart a real desire to be in service. And thank God we have in our heart a real desire to speak for spirit, because otherwise, A, I'd never be here doing this, but B, it would be really hard for me to do this. This is not part of my wheelhouse. This isn't a mask that I care to wear. I don't really care to be a podcaster, a YouTuber. I like sharing stories with people, but I prefer it one-on-one. I prefer the intimacy of the one-on-one exchange. And like everybody, I've had a massive exposures in my life of my world and my journey. with many different groups, but this isn't really my comfort level. I'm doing it because I feel guided to do it. But in terms of the idea of masks, this isn't one, there are people that want, like I had somebody in my life a couple of years ago say, I really want to start doing recordings and podcasts. And I thought, oh, heck, no, no, thanks. I can look at this example of these recordings as a real reflection of my mind being surrendered to spirit, because this kind of guidance to do these things has been there for many years for me to be doing this. And I've said no, truth telling, I've said no, spirit, thank you. So anyway, the idea of these roles that we've played in our lives, the roles that we've been invited to let go of, the roles that the spirit might want us to step into and perform for the spirit, they're all this kind of melting pot and cauldron for our healing. And it popped in this idea, Yuta and I float ideas back and forth, and they kind of morph and come and go. And so yesterday afternoon, we knew we wanted to do a talk today, but the idea of dropping a spiritual mask is actually what started this conversation. And now it's kind of expanding again into some other stuff. But for me, I'm having to constantly look at what am I doing with my mind and with my energy? And I've been taken through a very broad, far-reaching journey of seemingly putting on a lot of different masks and then having to take them off. And it's really juicy, really, really juicy journey, really valuable kind of process to take a look, to take inventory. Where have I played, as you said, the victim? What's that look like? How's that looked in my life? Where have I played the big shot? Where have I been a so-called planner or a manager in my work world? Where have I been a so-called lover or a hater? These are energetics that are kind of an architecture in terms of how we map our reality structure. And so the spirit has to work with us to see what they're calling forth for us and see what they're creating in our experience. And then for those of us called to awakening, to eventually move beyond them, we have to know the terrain. We have to know the lay of the land within our minds. So, this is for me, very broad, very multidimensional kind of conversation. And so if we wander in and out, of this and kind of meander along, it's because it's a deep dive. So anyway, that's what's showing up on this side.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, for those of us that are called to sort of let our minds be transformed from believing ourselves to be something very small in a body, at the mercy of basically everything around us. The ones that are called to transform that small idea of self into the truth of who all of us really are, which is something very much beyond perception and beyond this world of specifics and physical reality. It's a journey of mind watching, and it's a journey of learning to let the spirit use us. And I think in that process there's going to be so many shifts and changes, and it'll feel like our personalities are going to get rocked. Like the boat's going to get rocked pretty hard here and there. And if there's an attachment to any sort of specific traits, like personality traits, or stuff that we've learned in the past, and maybe we're really good at teaching math, and we find out at some point maybe that sort of logical side of the brain isn't really helping us on the spiritual journey. Like all of that needs to be seen and dropped. And it's nice that you mention just a reminder for gentleness, because it's very disturbing at times to bump up against these layers that feel safe, but the spirit is kind of gently nudging us to transcend them. And if I look back at my life, there's like I probably didn't take on too many worldly sort of roles because I haven't really done much in the world, like compared to some people. But like sort of stepping into adulthood, I feel like I was pretty immature when I started my first job, which was working at basically a little family owned restaurant. We were cooking burgers and we were also making ice cream. And it was, in a way, like if I look back now, I feel like the spirit obviously was already with me. And it was like, it was a huge portal for me to come out of shyness and quietness and sort of not really feeling like I liked people. So, I kind of had this mask of being a bit on the rebellious side and, kind of like off-putting probably to some people. And, putting myself in this environment of service-oriented work, it was really, really expansive. And I ended up finding out that that mask of shutting myself off from people and like kind of feeling like I was different from people in a lot of ways, and so I didn't really need to fit in, kind of just learning through that job that was pretty restrictive. And I actually really like people. I think that was the first time where I really found out I like people. And I think it was also the first time that I found that I actually naturally am really friendly. And not to like put myself on some kind of pedestal here, but it seemed like for the first time I was seeing that I had kind of some type of charisma that people really enjoyed. In sort of the setup where I was working, we didn't serve people necessarily, but we had like a big counter that people would walk up to and make their orders. And every time I was at the front taking people's orders, we had this big tip jar, and I just, I would end up in conversations with people, and like, at the end of the night, there would be just the tip jar would be almost full. And so it was kind of like this reflection of like, yeah, you have some kind of gift here with people. And if I hadn't allowed that job to do the work that it needed to do on me, I wouldn't have been able to see that. And I had no idea I was going to be talking about this, but like it's like just like sort of the initial place where I can see a big part of a mask that I was wearing throughout like my adolescence that actually wasn't really, it helped me during my adolescence for sure, kept me really safe. And then I was meant to fully transition through that and actually find out like, no, you do have a gift with people. And so, almost like spirit was telling me like, yeah, let's have a look. You actually like people. You like interacting and you like connecting. And, this sort of dark, it feels like a dark mask that I had on before that. I didn't need to wear that anymore. And yeah, I think it's just coming up as like an initial sort of like practical place where I could see here's a mask, and like just the kind of like the simplicity of how it got undone. And and then perhaps that turned into a different mask that I was actually really good, because I ended up seeing arrogance in this job as well. That I was doing things better than other people and really taking on this identity of being better at people interactions than a lot of the people I was working with there. And so that needed to be wiped as well. But yeah, I think it's just sort of a practical example of how our lives are used over time to really just to help our minds expand through these small masks and small roles and small sort of personality identities that we take on unconsciously most of the time. And I think, it's just kind of gone on this way throughout like the past few years as well. I've mentioned many times now that I I spent some time in spiritual community, and there were so many roles that I took on there. And it's really fun to see now that, some of the roles are coming back now and helping us do this podcast as well. Elizabeth and I were talking the other day, we're kind of working with spreadsheets now, and just sort of organizing sort of the back end of these recordings. And I learned a lot of stuff in that sort of area in the community. I worked with many spreadsheets and created documents and did a lot of organization. And, so that was kind of a hat or a role that I was wearing there a lot of the time. And it's kind of fun to let that one go, because I haven't done really anything in that direction for a while now. And now it's like, oh, like fingers snapping sort of quickness. It just comes back in and can be used by the spirit, and make things really easy for us in terms of organization and keeping things really clear in our minds for what we're doing here. So that's sort of my initial thought process with this.
Yeah, I love it. I love that you said, like, oh, I didn't know I'd be talking about this today. This is when we say we're here for the healing for ourselves, we really mean it. And I love the way the spirit works through us in these talks to call forth things that are helpful to our journeys in this moment now. And again, if it's helpful to one of you, fantastic. I really hope it will be. But I was having this recall to when I was around 12 or 13 years old. My father at that point was like my main caretaker. My parents had divorced, and my dad was a lawyer, very logical, very intuitive, but he most heavily seemed to rely on logic, and found himself in the dad role to 4 girls and a busy law practice and head of a household, all those roles he was playing. And, there's an idea that men kind of have more of the driving, like, what's the purpose? What's my purpose in life? And it often shows up in career and that kind of thing. So he was always asking me, even at that age, what do you want to do when you grow up? Like, where are we going with your train? Like, let's make sure it's on the track and it's getting where it needs to go. And at that age, I was already like, oh, what am I here for? And also, don't forget, that was a running theme in my mind. Don't forget, like, you've got something to do here in this life. And I had that running message all through my childhood. And it was kind of crazy making, because I didn't really know as a little kid persona, right, what that was going to mean in the grand scheme of my life. But my dad took me to this place that did aptitude testing, and it was an aptitude testing for like career people, for adults, and here I'm going in as like a 12, 13-year-old. And, it sort of took all of your abilities, reasoning, spatial reasoning, word use, blah, blah, blah. And then came back and said, oh, you'd be great as a doctor, or you'd be great as a lawyer, or you could be an architect, or you could be whatever. And I wanted somebody to tell me, this is who you are. The know thyself, I wanted somebody to hand it to me. And what came back was basically, and again, not tooting my horn, it's just my story. They said you could do anything. You're operating in a way that you could choose anything. Yeah, if you want to be an architect, it might be a little challenging in certain areas because your spatial reasoning's a little different than most people that choose that field, but you could do it. Go for it. That was not helpful information to me. That was overwhelming information. But it was a symbol, as you said, of the spirit saying, you're limitless. Well, for a 12, 13-year-old to be told you're limitless, that was not helpful. I actually wanted limitation. I wanted to put myself in a box. And every time I tried to put myself in a box, of course, I became insane, nuts, don't like it, don't want it. But, there's that kind of, again, the personality is longing for the masks. They want to create a reality to then present to the world, to be accepted and acceptable and to be able to survive. Some of the stuff comes back down to like really base survival stuff. But the spirit was saying to me, don't get caught in this idea that you're this limited such and such. And yet I had already gotten programming in my family that made me feel very limited, very small, very incapable, very unlovable. I did not have what felt for me to be loving reflections. Now, that was my mind. I'm not saying that was coming from anybody else. That's how I experienced my life and myself. And so as I went through life, Spirit did take me through these experiences to show me beyond these masks, as you said, beyond student, beyond employee, beyond girlfriend, beyond daughter. And I did have to go through them in lots of different ways and to really look at them with the Spirit as my journey was unfolding. And for me, there have been some really big ones that were really hard masks to take off or to have other people take off. For me, I talked in another talk about my dad, my father. He was so attached to the daughter role and to himself as the father role. And I played into it to a certain degree with him, despite trying to wiggle out of it. But at the end of his life, we had one event where there was something that had happened in the house, and I was having to fix something. And he's literally laying in his bed. I'm in the bathroom fixing something in the bathroom. And he's trying, despite having almost zero energy, right? It's like what energy he had needed to go into just maintaining the physical form, right? And he was trying to manage me so intensely. And I came back in that moment, and it had to have been the Spirit. And I just stood up and I said something to him, but the force of what was said to him, he was trying to sit up in his bed, and it like blew him back. It was as if a gust of wind had come in. It was such an interesting energetic, because I was annoyed and aggravated, but it was like it knocked him down. And what I was shown in that moment was the energetic breaking. And I said to him, as I was saying, I said, "You're so attached to being my father." That's actually what was said. And it broke the mask, the pull of the energy. It got dismantled in that moment, right? These are not just like, oh, I'm wearing a mask. No, these are energetic constructs, and they have to be dismantled. It's not just like, oh, well, I'm going to take my mask off today. I'm not going to be in my teacher role anymore. No, no, no. If you've invested eons in this idea of yourself as a teacher, you've constructed an energetic setup, an energetic map, a landscape that keeps feeding itself, you might say, that keeps calling forth witnesses, calling forth players, calling forth a stage that you can stand on to play out your teacher role. So we're actually not just talking about like, oh, I'm going to just stop being my mom character, or I'm going to stop being my daughter character. No, no, no. You've got to actually like roto yourself out of some of these when they're really strong ones. This idea of samsara, samskaras, right? These grooves in the mind. They're not just grooves in the mind as I see it. They're energetic constructs, and they become concretized. So when I stood up to my father at that moment, one more time, like Spirit was like, he's going soon. We've been trying to break this one down with you for a long time, Elizabeth. Like in came the Spirit in that moment to say, hey, Dave, you can't take this with you. Don't reincarnate another million times to try to work out the dad role with this particular character called your daughter. It knocked him down on it. Didn't sit all the way up in his bed, but it blew him back down. And he like sighed, right? So these roles, these masks are really, really, not to give things too much power, but they're a big deal that can't be dismissed. You can't just be like, oh yeah, it's no big deal. This stuff keeps generating data, generating reality structures. And so, yeah, I don't know where I was going with all that other than like, there's a story of like one of my big masks, so to speak, or one of my big roles, or one of my big starring, players on the stage kind of energetics that was a big one that I ended up losing, in a sense, you might say, a lot of energy to. And when we're talking about these masks and these energies, we're talking about them in these recordings for ourselves, for our healing, because we can't be fully in the channel with spirit if we've got the masks on. So as we've talked about time and time again, the spirit has to help us take them off and not just drop the mask of like, okay, I'm no longer going to play this role, but to actually purify, put in the fire, rinse in the ocean, blast through with the light. It's got to be purified out of our energetic constitution. It's got to be purified out of our mental body, our emotional body. So it's like spiritual big jobs, actually, this conversation. And yeah, I've just been shown time and time again the value of going there. We talked about gentleness in the beginning. We don't really want to have our universe dismantled in this realm. Like the personality doesn't want that. But at the same time, the personality knows I'm called to something greater and I can't find it here in the world. Why am I so frustrated and suffering so much? Well, because if you're wearing a mask, you're not operating from truth.
Yeah, I like that you're talking about it kind of like it's not just, oh, I'm just going to drop this now. And, there's a story that comes to my mind of this woman that David Hoffmeister, like he's told this story. He's a Course in Miracles teacher, and he's told this story many times where, there's a big teaching in the Course about we're not the body. I'm not the body. And kind of is a teaching that comes up over and over again in the Course. And I think a lot of people want to think that they can just jump to that conclusion and all of a sudden that's the reality that they live in. And some of them, like this lady in the story, she ended up being so sort of fed up with her body that she ended up getting herself hypnotized to not see her body. And we know how hypnotism works. It doesn't make the body go away if you're hypnotized to believe that you don't have a body anymore. It's still there, and you're going to run into stuff and you're going to hurt your body. And that's what happened. That's what happened to this lady. Like she ended up, getting bruises and just, running into door frames. And it's not a good way of dealing with these sorts of beliefs in the mind, which, these masks and roles essentially are all just beliefs in the mind. And we can't pretend our way there. We can't skip steps in this really a healing process of our minds. And yeah, so just kind of, I appreciate the reminder that it is kind of a lot of work sometimes to work with these kind of energetics, like you say, and constructs. Yeah, they do kind of become concretized over time, and it isn't always a fun process. But we had a little reminder from sort of our spiritual support team that we should be enjoying ourselves doing these recordings. And one of the things that we talked about too before we hit the record button is that essentially all of us just want to be happy, right? We want to find happiness in this kind of container that we seem to have been dropped in here in this world. And it takes steps seemingly to get to that happiness. So all of this kind of hard work is really worth it. And yeah, it can be really scary to have some of these concepts be triggered, so to speak, or like, buttons pushed, like you said. Can be kind of scary, and sometimes it can be really disappointing and just difficult to run into some stuff. Like I know, when again, like spiritual community was such a big part of my journey that I'm just going to, it'll keep coming up in conversation here. But like being in spiritual community, there's so many roles that you're given, and they're really great expansive roles. But like with anything in this world, the ego will make use of it, or our sort of small mind will make use of it. And That's one choice. Or the other option is that the spirit, or our higher sort of state, our higher mind, our higher self, can make use of all of these roles. And I think, when we talk about wanting to be happy, like giving over all of those roles is what's going to make things really fun. And it's what's going to bring the most joy, like kind of letting the spirit, like when I was talking about this job I was working, like letting the spirit, even though I wasn't aware of what was really happening at the time, but it was like I was discovering parts of myself that I didn't know, like this sort of piece of myself that really does enjoy connecting with people. Allowing the spirit to bring that forth and then continue to use it since then has been like one of the best things. Like, growing up, I could have sworn I would be doing some kind of work that is like me in a room with a canvas, and I'm just painting by myself in, like, my own little cave. And apparently that's not what the spirit wanted, and still continues to want for me. The experience that spirit wants for me is one that's really expansive and really joyful, and like just really exciting in like the most like in the most amazing way. And so my whole life has just, been kind of this process of finding these roles that made me stay in small places, and letting the spirit kind of gently rub on them, and kind of, it's like doors opening, sort of opening these doors so that my mind could become expansive and allow in the fun and the goofiness and the silliness and the joy. And working in that restaurant ended up being super fun because I didn't want to stay attached to being the separate loner type. It ended up being really fun. And then when it was time for me to expand through that, it became really clear as well. Like, that role here is maximized now, so we'll find something better for you. And it's like the container became too small in that restaurant for me, and so the spirit had to lead me to other jobs at the time that would feel more expansive, or even allow me a bit more of a healing container for certain times where I wasn't around people so much. Yeah, I think just kind of like reminding that these roles and masks and identities can be used by the ego or by the spirit. And it's a lot more fun to let the spirit guide, kind of which role we are meant to be taking on at which moment, or, when we're meant to just be dropping things completely. I know there's certain parts of my mind that just needed to, like, especially like the kind of restrictive sort of ideas in my mind around like money, and how how I can support myself in the seemingly 3D realm. I had some very kind of small ideas around what was possible, and the spirit really had to work with me to let these things really drop away. That kind of this monastic, poor poor sort of old story. And yeah, just letting me expand through yeah, really these restrictive ideas in my mind that were kind of like masks. Like, oh yeah, I've never really had a lot of money, so that's just how it's going to be. Oh, I don't really need money, that's just how it's going to be. Like, that's the money one is a kind of a bigger sort of thing that was really sort of in the back of my mind. And a lot of it came from my parents. And it's been really interesting talking to my sister, because she's always seen this dynamic with me and my dad around money. And I think I've shared this with you before, Elizabeth, where my dad worked for the same small accounting firm for who knows how many years, 30 years at least. And he never once got a pay raise, and he never felt worthy enough to even ask for a pay raise, which is ridiculous, when you think about it. Somebody working in the same job for so long and not getting a raise. And so, like, somewhere in the back of my mind, I had taken on small ideas around money and kind of living below maybe what's helpful for me, and accepting too little, kind of, so these are just kind of some of the things in my life that the spirit has just needed to expand and open up for me, so that things could become smoother and easier and more fun, and so more doors can even open so that he can use me more fully, which is always the thing that's running in the background of my mind. Like, how can I be used more fully by the spirit? Because that's the only thing that's really exciting to me anymore. And yeah, I like that you brought up this idea too of, what am I supposed to be in this world? Because kind of in the year after I left community, I was in a pretty dark place, wanting to know, like, spirit, what do you want me to do? I need to know specifically what you want me to do. And it was a really kind of difficult time to work through that. And but I did start hearing answers in prayer, and it wasn't a huge, this is what you're going to be kind of answer, but it was, why don't you do this? Offer this for a little while, offer this to some people online for a while, do some meditations with people through Zoom. And it got me out of this idea that I needed to have this specific thing, sort of this weird sort of drive. I need to know what I'm supposed to be. Well, what we're supposed to be is what we really are in truth, and that is a limitless spirit. And really, I think what we're looking for is answers to how that can practically look in this world where we still think we're little bodies. So, and those answers have come over and over again for me on this whole journey. And it looks like they've come in the form of different roles. And when I've allowed the spirit to use those roles, it's been always really great and really fun. And it continues to be.
Yeah, what's coming to mind is, again, the idea that if we surrender to the divine to the best of our ability, but if you can make it as big a yes as possible, it's going to be easier. And to go where guided, allow yourself to be led, to the healing. And I was having two things pop in. One was when I lived in this spiritual community. The day came where it was like, you got to decide if you're going to stay here or not. And that mask, it was time for that mask of yoga teacher, spiritual practitioner in this community to drop. And I bounced out of there into a house sitting thing down in the city for a few weeks, and had a very similar experience to you of a lot of darkness. Holy cow, what am I going to do now? I left my career to be in the spiritual community, right? No money, no direction, no clarity. And I, house sat in this apartment in the lower part of Manhattan and barely got out to feed myself. I was in so much darkness, right? It just, that dropping of the mask was really hard and left me feeling very uncertain. And then when I was doing the Peruvian shamanism, I knew that was a healing container for me, but I sort of felt like, oh, this is going to be my path. Maybe this is my path. And I heard in like the third module, there was like a ceremony we were doing. And I went to sit in front of one of our teacher directors, and I heard bounce in, this is not your path. And I started to bawl my eyes out. I'm sitting there in ceremony. There's this beautiful sound and music and light, and people are in their reverence, and people in their prayer, and people very internally directed. And I'm sitting there to receive this blessing from a teacher. This isn't it. They must have thought I was really feeling touched by the spirit. I was devastated. I was devastated. Oh my God. Oh, it's so great. It's so good. Oh my God. So, it's like the spirit is constantly working with us for our healing. And, when I heard that message, I loved that container. It was so full of reverence and gratitude, and I love ceremony. I always have. And it was healing work. It was going into the underworld. It was energy work that I'm really a natural at. It's part of my wheelhouse. It was such a container of so many things that I love so much. You talk about like, oh, finding the things you love. Well, I loved so much of this offering. But when I heard this isn't your path, I knew it. I knew it was right. As devastating as it was, I knew it was right. And so this idea of being willing to be moved in and out of these containers, in and out of these places for healing is so vital. And we talked earlier about like letting the spirit put a mask on with us and being willing to take it off. Like Yuta and I, we check in all the time. How's this feeling for you? You want to keep going? Do you feel like this is where we're guided to go? And we say regularly, if spirit says you're done today, we're done. Really light, really full of joy in that. Like, if that's where we're going, great. We're feeling very unattached without being detached. We're fully engaged in this. We're fully showing up, right? And yet we're ready to have it be blown away anytime the spirit says. And for me, that's a reflection of this idea of this is not a persona for me. The dropping of masks along the way has been for me to be able to be in this place right now to say, yeah, okay, spirit, what do you want to do? Here I am. Here I am to do what you would have me do. Now, I might change my tune in the next minute, but in this moment, there's no attachment to this. It's purely being in that channel with spirit and without a mask about it. People might see me as, oh, she's doing YouTubes or she's doing teachings or she's doing whatever. Well, they might, for them, that might be right. For me, I'm just here like letting it flap out. My butt's flapping in the wind with all of you, right? So yeah, I'm willing to put a mask on. I've had a lot of teachers in different ways say, it's okay to put on the mask so long as you remember you're putting on a mask. That's a big distinction from, I now got trained to be, an animal communicator. And so I'm an animal communicator and making that an identity, making that who I am, making that the face onto the world stage that's going to go try to seek approval or try to use it as a means for getting in the world. That's a nuance that we learn through the path, right? That's a nuance to go like, okay, fine, put that mask on if that's great. And if that's what spirit wants you to do, hallelujah, you'll be fantastically dynamically helpful. But there's like a way of holding your mind that says, this is not who I truly am. It's a role I'm playing. And for many of us, for me, it's just been about learning that there's a little bit of a difference there. So.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yep.
Love it. Yeah, exactly. It's just that reminder. Exactly. Like if a mask is needed, great, use it. If a role is needed, great, use it. Other than that, it's not necessary. So yeah, I love it. As always, it's just as interesting for us to see where the spirit goes with us in these as it might be for you. And so yeah, I'm grateful for the exploration, and thanks to anybody who is listening. And anything else from you?
Just a heartfelt see you next time.
Yes. Thank you. See you next time.
Lots of love.
Bye.